Welcome to the session on the second day of a whole weekend of Museum Wales's Food Festival this year. Now, I'm sure you, like us, would have liked nothing more than to have a nice reunion at St Fagans, as we've enjoyed over the past years. But due to the COVID pandemic, of course, that isn't possible this year. So I really hope that you're making the most of a wealth of sessions this weekend, a variety of subjects, food being central among them. And of course, food was a central theme all through the COVID pandemic lockdown and beyond. And I'm sure it will remain that way for the next few months at least. Food certainly hit the headlines. It was on all our minds from those shocking pre-lockdown days where the restaurants, bars and pubs shut their doors. And then, of course, we faced those panicked empty shelves in supermarkets all over Wales. Then, of course, we were faced with our local shopping centres, local high streets, the queues perhaps, or maybe you were faced with the challenge of securing a slot on the internet for your supermarket shopping. Perhaps you were shopping not only for yourselves, but on behalf of family members or neighbours. Food was a source of anxiety for many, but also a source of comfort and escapism. I think there was a lot of pulling legs right at the beginning when people realised that others were sharing their sourdough loaves, their banana breads, and perhaps a cheeky Friday night quarantini on the social media. Some thought, oh crikey, this is all very middle class. How about others who had to face greater difficulties? Well, food obviously is a hot potato, political issue. And what's extraordinary is that the curators at Museum Wales actually tackled this during a project that they created very early on called Collecting COVID. Now, I didn't know anything about this, and perhaps some of you have never heard it before, and I can assure you it is a fascinating and timely, really moving collection of answers provided by the citizens of Wales, answering a questionnaire. And here to share more about this are two curators from the Department of History and Archaeology at St Fagans, Museum Wales, McAleavey and Elen Phillips. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mared, how are you today? Are you okay?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for welcoming me.
Diolch yn fawr. And Elen, can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you. Diolch, Lowri. I'm well, thanks.
Fantastic. Can we start actually with the title of your roles, really, at Museum Wales? Some out there may think like me, gosh, what an amazing job. But what exactly does a curator at the Department of History and Archaeology entail from day to day? Elen, let's start with you.
Oh gosh, well, it's a very varied job, but in the context of this discussion, one of my responsibilities at St Fagans is to collect contemporary life. So to ensure that the here and the now, today is represented in the museum's collection. So thinking back over the past few years, with colleagues and community groups, I've collected objects and stories related to Brexit, to Extinction Rebellion, and of course now my work, and so is Mared's work, we're very much focused on collecting the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, Mared, am I right in thinking that food is actually, does it play a central role in your work as curator?
Well, I'm responsible for the food and food culture collections. So, yes.
What does that entail? Where do we see food at St Fagans? Give us examples. I mean, I can think of the sweet shop and the bakery. What else is there?
Oh gosh. Well, we're fortunate to have such a rich archive of material that was collected by predecessors and up till present date of items related to food. We've got over 600 recordings of people talking about the processes, the terminology and so on. And that research has been used then in order to interpret and to furnish the historic buildings on site. And of course, you mentioned the bakehouse. We've got the Communal oven from Georgetown. We've got the flour mill, and we've got gwalia stores, and each of them tell their own individual stories. And in the new gallery as well, there is a part there that looks specifically at food.
I mean, I'm a food writer, I'm a food author. I know the pleasure I get from, well, not only cooking and escaping to the kitchen, sharing, my love for others and myself, by preparing a meal. And I absolutely love, writing about food. But could you tell us what's so special about food from a historical perspective? What can researching into the field of food and the food industry here in Wales tell us about our forebears?
Well, I think food impacts on every part of our life. So it's a really good mirror of what's going on at different periods of time, be it from a cultural, an economic or a social point of view. And if we think of things from agriculture, the hunting, health, religion, politics, movements of people, it's all associated with food. And I think historians of the future will be looking back at this period and food will be central to what they'll be studying.
Well, Ellen, I mentioned a few examples a little earlier of how food came to the fore. It was a political issue, wasn't it, very early on, as well as being a source of comfort and escapism. What were your priorities as curators when we, the people, saw the doors close on all the Museum Wales sites all over Wales? I mean, your jobs carried on, didn't they? What were you doing behind closed doors? And what were your priorities at the time?
Yeah, okay, so well, I guess in the immediate aftermath of the lockdown itself and the physical closing of all 7 of our sites, we were very much focused on safeguarding the collections and also ensuring that our staff were well, putting processes in place to enable those who could to work from home, checking in with our community partners, volunteers, and the mammoth task of turning a physical program, we interact with people and objects every day in our job, into a digital program. And that took a few weeks, and we were absorbing the enormity of the situation. But from the word go, even before lockdown, as curators, I think we knew very, very early on that, we really did have to devise a project to collect people's experiences of the pandemic. But of course, being mindful that we were all in crisis and people were suffering, we were all adjusting to the new normal. So whatever project that we were going to do, we were very mindful of our ethical code as curators, as museum professionals, that we had to be sensitive to people's emotional needs. So we didn't actually put our project to work, although we were devising it behind the scenes for a good few weeks. We didn't actually launch our Collecting COVID, I'm going to call it initiative actually, because it's more than a project. It's going to go on for a while, until the 16th of May, which was a good 7 weeks post-lockdown.
Right. And am I right in thinking also that, I can only imagine how much pressure you were all under. Anyone working from home was just, under pressure to produce. And I know in the cases of other museums and galleries all over the world, I noticed the virtual tours and so much content out there. Where did you turn to for guidance for such a mammoth task?
Yeah, there was a lot of content being shared internationally within the museum world. There was almost a race, you could argue, who could get their project out there first. But what we have done in the past here at this museum, actually, when we're at a turning point in our own institutional history, is to look back at what the museum did in those early pioneering years. Okay. St Fagans opened its doors back in 1948, and as part of the recent redevelopment of this museum, we've looked back at the early works and the early writings of some of the museum's first curators. So for our Collecting COVID project, we launched an online questionnaire asking people to document their experiences of lockdown. And that questionnaire, which is live on the website, and we'll discuss it, I'm sure, in a minute, was actually inspired by the museum's early collecting. So looking back at the past 70-odd years, we discovered that the museum had, from 1937 up until the 1980s, used questionnaires as a data capture tool. These were printed questionnaires, of course, so they would print them off on different subjects, send them off to different communities across Wales, and those written replies would come into the museum and be archived. Wow. And we have 800 of those historic ones, if you like. So the contemporary COVID questionnaire is modelled on that, but there are slight differences to how we approach that collecting today compared to our predecessors.
Gosh, so Marad, what were your priorities? What were you after, when you were crafting these questions? And, are they very similar to the questions posed back in the 1930s?
Well, I suppose theme-wise, it's a lot to do with everyday life of the old questionnaires. But what they did was go after more of the terminology, the processes, rather than what we've done is to have it more open-ended and try to get people to respond emotionally as well. Mm. What you don't have in the original questionnaires is a feeling about the person's character and feelings at the time, whilst the Collecting COVID questionnaires certainly have so much emotion attached to them.
Really?
Yeah. Definitely, because a lot of the people who have responded, at the end of the current questionnaire, there's like a free text box for people to just say whatever they want to say. Mm. And a few people have said that taking part in the questionnaire, offloading their feelings, has been quite cathartic. Mm-hmm. One young mother from Roath in Cardiff, living with her husband, filled the questionnaire, and in the answers, you can feel, the frustrations, the tensions, the worries. And then at the end, she says, actually, this questionnaire has been surprisingly therapeutic. I feel strangely lighter, like I've just spent half an hour in the confessional. I can just leave it there and walk out. I think those open-ended questions that we pose really have allowed people to really answer quite honestly, and there's a rawness to the responses that we've received.
Goodness gracious. So you launched this initiative back in May. I mean, have the responses, have they come in dribs and drabs? How many have you had so far? A handful?
Shall I answer, Marad? Well, we've had 1,000, which is kind of exceeded our expectation, because let's be honest, it's quite a hefty questionnaire, over 22 questions.
Right.
And, it's not a yes or a no answer type questionnaire. So we're really, really, overwhelmed with the response.
I bet.
Obviously a huge flurry straight after the launch, and we were lucky enough to get press coverage in The Guardian and Wales Online and BBC, etc. But they're still coming in, and the message is it's still open. Please do still contribute if you feel like you want to.
On that note, actually, anyone watching this at home, you may notice on the sidebar an opportunity to contribute. It says, say something nice, if you're a nice person. if you've got any remarks or questions for our curators, or even, if you want to join in, if you'd like to contribute to this ongoing questionnaire, just contact us. But otherwise, just sit back and enjoy the conversation. I know I'm gripped already. Give me a few examples of these questions then, Mared, and where does food come into it?
Okay, well, as Ellen said, there's 22 questions.
Right.
And theme-wise, we've got daily life, health and well-being, government and information, and the future. Within those questions, there's 2 specific ones that relate to shopping, asking people, have your shopping habits changed? And then, have your eating habits changed? Naturally, there's loads of really wealthy answers there. But what was surprising was that food does filter in to the other questions as well.
Really?
When we're talking about a typical day, food comes in. How children adapted, it's in there as well. Steps people are taking to protect themselves, how they're feeling emotionally, what's brought them comfort, and what will stay in their mind as well. So yeah, food is such a strong theme.
I must admit, this kind of holiadur, I was going to say, the Welsh word for questionnaire, this really appeals to me. I'm a diary writer, and in fact, I was very happy to keep a very detailed diary all through lockdown, feeling very much like a lot of people that I was living through history, in such a significant time. And also for me, somebody who loves to cook, loves to display my love for others through cooking. And I'm very, very happy to cook for myself. I really, really enjoyed my time in the kitchen, but also outside in my immediate area. I'm very fortunate to live near Parkland. And there I started foraging and cooking. And for me, food was a source of, far more than sustenance. It was pleasure, it was escapism. Yes, I was definitely creating those quarantinis on a Friday night, and fun too. And I think, sharing that on social media, everyone was, I think food was a subject, a diversion too for some, but I'm sure for many, many, many people, including, of course, those who are dealing with COVID themselves, food is a different matter. I'm sure the responses have, displayed a broad spectrum of experiences. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right there. There is a divide really amongst the 1,000 responses. So those whose experiences might mirror your experiences, Lowri, where food has been a source of comfort and joy during the pandemic. But on the other hand, for a lot of people, food was a source of real concern, anxiety due to poverty, and for some people, the inaccessibility of food or the worry around having a supermarket slot or what have you. So, as Mara said, it's a constant theme throughout, in a way, all the questions and responses that we've received, but very, very different perspectives on the subject.
Now, I realise that this questionnaire is completely anonymous. That is, you respect people's privacy. There's no names shared or anything like that. But would you mind sharing a few of the responses with us today, just so that we get a taste of, how raw and honest that these answers can get? Because I know, Mared, you've been moved to tears by some of these answers, haven't you?
Oh, definitely. When I first read a few of the initial responses, I felt so emotional. And I think one of the early ones that I did read was about the panic buying. And there was a person who lived worked in a supermarket, and if I quote him now, he says, panic buying started off with just toilet roll and hand wash, and the other areas were largely untouched. But then no section was safe, and I took pics on my phone of almost whole aisles stripped. The one memory will be the nurse crying in a car after her shift, having been in to get food, but nothing there. It's powerful.
Gosh, it feels like so long ago now, and yet I remember that video being shared on the social media. So many different and similar experiences. So much has happened in so little time, hasn't there? You mentioned that as a very early example. I mean, are you still receiving responses now in the past few days or weeks, Ellen? How has the tone changed, if it has changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, some people now are back in work, children are back in school. So the response rate has slowed down a little, but obviously with the further restrictions that were announced last week, and they will be enforced tomorrow, people's experiences are going to change again. So it'll be interesting to know if we receive more following these different kind of stages of lockdown. But what's interesting as well is how the big news stories of the day also filter into the responses. You can follow, in a way, you can track the pandemic through the headlines in a way. Dominic Cummings, Black Lives Matter, the nurse crying on the video in the car, those big headline stories, they filter into people's responses and consciousness as well. So yeah, it's a mirror in a way of the pandemic.
How are these experiences worded? Are they quite careful or factual? Or do we get a real sense of these people as actual people? Are they very candid in their answers?
I would say that they're very candid, because the way the questionnaire has been script devised allows for that. In a way, you could argue we've got 1,000 diaries. You really do get a sense of the person, and of course, as curators, they will go into the archive unedited. It's their words. It's their testimony, and I think that's quite appealing to people in a way, that their voices do go into the National Archive. Their experiences are legitimised in that sense. And they're very candid, Lowri, really, really quite raw, some of them.
Blimey, this is really quite mind-blowing, actually. It's quite moving to know that our national institutions, or certainly in this case, Museum Wales, has really considered the experiences of us, now, here and now, and rather than, I think many of us have a concept of museums or museums of history as, only respecting history, that our forebears are more important than us somehow. And this is really quite significant and quite shocking, actually. But of course, as I mentioned, we have been living through history. So Mared, the themes, what stands out to you? Perhaps if we go chronologically, you mentioned the empty shelves. How about the experience of shopping, for example? Do you sort of lump them in your sort of mythology, or?
I suppose there's the not being able to get the shopping, the click and collect sort of thing. There's a person here saying, previously we used click and collect, but now my husband spends 2 hours or more doing the weekly shop. He does this on his own with a list instead of the whole family going. We no longer pop to the shop in between main visits unless absolutely necessary, or to purchase extras. Even then, it's my husband who goes. We've made an effort to shop online very often though, but we've been unable to get any online deliveries, so we've had to go out. We're both at a vulnerable age, so that has given me anxiety, and we only go once a week.
Yes. Well, already I've heard the word frightening, anxiety. That tells you people are being brutally honest, aren't they? They're really opening up and sharing with their anxieties with us. It's extraordinary.
Definitely. There's quite a number of them saying, okay, to start I was shopping once a week in a supermarket, but then it started to feel unsafe. So I changed to click and collect. So they were lucky they had a slot once a week. and then starting using the local small butcher and fruit and veg shop a couple of times a week. So it's that change of going towards the more local producers as well, which is something that we see.
In such a short time, you're actually reading how society changed, aren't you? It's like almost reading a sci-fi novel.
And well, what comes through as well with talking about the changing habits is some people express that desire to keep these new practices or customs, that they would prefer going forward not to revert back to the shopping every day for convenience, going to the big multinational supermarkets. And there's this kind of more of a sort of a realization that there are producers on their doorstep that they could, if they can, support. So yeah, here's somebody from Cardiff. I used to shop for tea every evening on my way home from work. I'm now getting a veg box delivered from a local greengrocer, local bakery delivering, and fishmonger. I hope to carry on shopping in this way, even when something closer to normality returns.
We've had a response here. My mum met some of her neighbours for the first time during lockdown. Thank you, Bernice Parker. Yes, well, yeah, it was very much a time for communities to come together, sort of an extended family in a way. If your family members were far away, do we get a sense of that coming through some of the answers?
Oh yes, I mean the neighbours helping or doing the shop is definitely something that comes through. There's a lady here saying that she'd organised for everything to be delivered to the house. And she was really touched when two younger friends, because they're both in their early 70s, offered to shop for us. At first, I was taken aback as I felt I was too young for such attention. But now we feel we're able to receive such kindness. So yeah, it is something, it's a very common thread.
And what about food as a communal pleasure? That is, so many of our significant life happenings happen around food, around the family table, not only sort of discussing the events of the day, but I'm thinking about special events, special occasions, birthdays, reunions, anniversaries. It's often a treat, isn't it, to go to a restaurant because it's extra special and it's a break from the kitchen. How did the pandemic disrupt that element of eating or dining or enjoying or consuming our food?
Well, specifically with the birthdays, there's one lovely little quote here saying that one of my children turned 7 during lockdown, and his birthday party obviously had to be cancelled, but he took it well. There was a while where I thought I wasn't going to be able to bake him a birthday cake as the shops just didn't have any eggs or flour in.
Yeah.
But one of my husband's colleagues got hold of some and they gave it to us, so he got his cake.
Yes, I remember I discovered a small supermarket round the corner from me, and I was amazed that there was strong white bread flour there. I always kept this secret to myself, and then I was a few weeks later stood in a supermarket a bit further away. So it was a bigger supermarket, and it was very early in the morning, of course. That's when I was going to 8 a.m. and a mother of 5 was in front of me, ruining the fact that she just simply could not find flour, and her children loved to bake, and it was one way of keeping them occupied. And I, of course, what else could I do but to share the fact that my local supermarket had plenty? And she said, I live around the corner from there. She hadn't even considered going there. So yeah, there's so much of this sort of the challenges that we faced, and yet people were quite laid back, especially children. I know my little niece, she missed out on her 4th birthday party too, but people came together and people were able to help each other, or I think children actually were pretty brave and pretty laid back in some instances. What about experiences such as food hygiene? to this day, of course, because this situation is ongoing, there are feelings that the products or the stuff that was coming from the deliveries, or perhaps, from the supermarket or even your local grocers, that you needed to wash these products before we could handle it, even leaving them for hours, if not days at times. Did that did that appear at all in the answers?
Yes, it did. Yes, there's quite a lot of mention of sort of washing with bleach or with Milton, for example. Personally, we rarely go out, and all the food shopping and deliveries come into the house and it's washed in Milton solution before being putting away. There's quite a number of them mentioning that. It's the way of protecting themselves.
Another remark by Bernice. She adds, her mother also moaned that Bernice bought her the wrong size tin of beans, 25-gram difference. Yes, of course. I was shopping on behalf of my father, and I saw a couple of funny videos where people were bemoaning, "Oh, you didn't get my coffee," That was, shopping for others was bit of a weight on shoulders for some. Do we have examples of people who have contributed to the questionnaire who were worried about, keeping others going too?
Yeah, there's a lot of these neighbours helping out, as Mara said. Lots of people also who did manage to get one of those coveted click and collect slots or the delivery slots, then divvying out the shopping with their neighbours. Somebody from Wrexham here, I've been fortunate enough to get a recurring slot with a big supermarket. Friends and family have not been so lucky, so to avoid them having to go out, I'm ordering on their behalf, and then they're coming to collect from her doorstep. She also adds that she hasn't bought any new clothes because she's put on so much weight. She spends a huge amount of time in her pyjamas now. The other aspect of the emotional eating and the comfort eating.
Of course, yes. Food creates so many different emotions, not just pleasure or a heady sort of fragrance of spice, brand new bursts of to the senses, but it induces feelings of guilt, shame even, doesn't it? But during the pandemic, am I right in thinking that it was actually even more of a challenge for many?
Yeah, and we were saying earlier on, weren't we, about the divide, if you like, in the experiences. And, what does come out in the questionnaires is how this pandemic has compounded social and economic inequalities that are in our communities. The most memorable responses for me are those that reflect on people's economic struggling. I mean, there's one here, a disabled man living in a flat with his father and brother, so 3 of them together in a ground floor flat. He says, I used to shop daily and sort bargains as I need a strict diet for health reasons and limited income. I'm now spending 40% more on ordering online. I'm stuck indoors with the same family members and I'm trying not to take out my frustrations on them. I suffer from a lack of sleep due to worrying about money and whether any of us will get ill. We all have chronic health conditions. And in the same vein here, a vicar from the Caerphilly area who at the time was overseeing a food distribution project within his parish, saying very honestly, some of the calls I take as a vicar are particularly tough at the moment. People grieving, people who are struggling with mental health, people who are in desperate poverty, and even people who cannot cook anything with the food we give in food parcels, because the poverty is so diverse and vast. That can be hard to comprehend at times. So, yeah, very, very emotional and honest responses that we're receiving.
Well, I remember reading last year a study which showed that Wales was that food poverty was endemic in Wales. And I didn't quite understand that term, food poverty. And it was interesting that they defined one element of food poverty is accessibility to a market or supermarket with reasonably priced products. And we've all, noticed how our local metro supermarket, has products, premium products that might have, higher prices than the very outskirts of town where you've got the massive hypermarket where, you can afford, more products there. And it struck me, certainly shopping hyper locally, the corner shop, for example, for some people, perhaps the difference of £3 dearer than 3 miles away is a world of difference.
There's a quote just saying exactly that, basically.
Oh, well.
Saying, I've not been further than the expensive corner shop in over 3 months. Reduced choice for higher price on a reduced income. Some days I try not to eat just to save money.
Oh my gosh, heartbreaking. I mean, how common an experience is this for you as curators to be moved in such a way, by this kind of research?
I think by the very nature of our work that, the projects that we work on very often involved working with people who have gone through traumatic life experiences, be they refugees and asylum seekers to army veterans. I'm just thinking about some of the projects that I've worked on in recent years. But this project, because I suppose as well that the enormity of the situation, we're all in it as well. This one has been particularly emotional in that sense.
And it's ongoing, of course. And who knows what comes next? There is a new season ahead of us, new challenges. I mean, do you welcome the fact that this is an ongoing project? Are you relishing the prospect of far more entries?
Yes, I mean, we hope that people will still contribute to this, especially, as Ellen mentioned earlier, the sort of change again in our lives in the last couple of days, and with everything coming in tomorrow. So if people do want to contribute, if they go to the Amgueddfa Cymru website and click on the Casglu Covid white box there, they'll be sent through to the questionnaire.
Wonderful. Now tell me, before we wind up this fascinating conversation, how about other themes that were touched upon, or are there any quotes that you'd really like to share? I don't know, I'm thinking of other themes. We've touched on children and community, or how about that sort of food guilt or the snacking, or not just food, drink? How did that sort of that theme enter the equation?
Well, I think the snacking and the food, the comfort eating, a lot of people sort of talk about the period as being similar to Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Having so many treats in the house. There's a quote here as well saying, I'm eating far too much. I think this is partly due to boredom. My alcohol consumption has also increased as I'm not going to drive anywhere.
No, of course.
Then in answer to the question, what's brought comfort? Alcohol, exclamation mark. Baking and talking with people.
Yep.
Yeah, so put on over a stone in carbohydrates. I think Ellen might have quoted that earlier. Carbohydrates and alcohol, yeah.
What about you, Ellen?
Yeah, there's lots of references to treats and chocolate and crisps. You know, I love food anyway, but I'm eating as much as I would over the Christmas holiday. I have treat food in the house, etc., etc. But on the other hand, there are also some testimony from people who actually the enormity of the situation made them lose their appetite. You know,
Really?
the other side of people's complex relationship with food. Somebody here, the constant anxiety over the entire situation has made it very difficult for us to want to eat. Good. Living in close quarters with other people has made it feel like life is under a magnifying glass, which also makes it difficult to want to eat.
Yes.
So yeah, food being a source of anxiety again here, but also for other people, food being that source of comfort and the emotional crutch, if you like.
Well, I am agog. I am so impressed. I'm moved actually as a citizen of Wales that you guys, you know, curators, the whole team, that the institution has been there for us all along, and most of us didn't even know that this questionnaire was happening, and I'm sure that many would like to contribute, because of course, as I say, we don't know what happens next, and I'm sure you found that every different month has provided you with a wealth of new experiences. So I definitely, for one, I would be interested in contributing. I don't know about anyone else at home. But certainly, when you mentioned that source of comfort, I'm so glad to hear that so many of your contributors have enjoyed the experience of really indulging in a therapeutic exercise, and have seen this initiative as a chance, a kind of a mindfulness session for the soul in a way, just to be able to express how they felt, how they still feel. And so, well, I'm really grateful to you both for sharing just a glimpse into this fascinating project, and really glad that it's ongoing. I'm sure it'll be a source of comfort and interest to many for many years to come. Elen, Phillips and McAleavey, I've thoroughly enjoyed myself this afternoon. Thank you both so much. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi'ch dwy.
Diolch.